One fire burned away his dream of unifying China. One decision made him a villain for 1,000 years. Today, let's continue exploring Cao Cao. This is part 2, the Battle of Red Cliffs, his road to usurpation, his inner circle, especially Xun Yu, and finally, his death. And before we finish, we will compare him with several historical figures around the world who walked a similar path. Okay, let's begin. In 208 AD, Liu Biao, the governor of Jing province, passed away. At the same time, Cao Cao had just unified northern China. With momentum on his side, he marched south with 200,000 troops. Liu Biao's son, Liu Cong, surrendered immediately, and Liu Bei, our old friend, already defeated by Cao Cao in the north and now trapped in Jing province, had no choice but to flee again, eventually forming an alliance with Sun Quan in Jiangdong. At this moment, Cao Cao was at the peak of his confidence. By the Yangtze River, he hosted a grand banquet and recited a famous line of poetry. A leader who serves the people with all his heart will finally win the loyalty of the nation. In his eyes, Liu Bei and Sun Quan were already beaten. The unification of China felt within arm's reach. But Cao Cao forgot one thing. The Yangtze River was not the Yellow River, and most of his soldiers came from the north. They had never fought on water. Many became seasick, vomiting, collapsing, unable to stand. To keep order, Cao Cao chained the ships together and laid planks across them, turning the fleet into floating land. It seemed really clever, but finally became the spark of disaster. Sun Quan's chief commander Zhou Yu had already spotted Cao Cao's fatal weakness. Then General Huang Ai proposed a daring plan, a fake surrender. He prepared 10 ships packed with dry grass and sulfur, pretending to defect, waiting for just one thing, the right wind. When the southeast wind finally rose, the 5 ships drove straight into Cao Cao's fleet. The chained warships became a floating hell. Flames swallowed the river and the surrounding hills. That was how this place came to be known as Red Cliffs. Soldiers screamed, some burned alive, some drowned, others were trampled to death in the chaos. The losses were beyond counting. Cao Cao escaped only under heavy guard, defeated, humiliated. The Battle of Red Cliffs was the greatest defeat of Cao Cao's life. From that moment on, he never crossed the Yangtze River again. Liu Bei took control of Jing province, Sun Quan secured his rule over Jiangdong, and with that, the 3 kingdoms were born. Defeated, Cao Cao retreated north, standing by the Yellow River, looking south. Perhaps he finally understood one truth. In times of chaos, history is never a game one man can finish alone. Red Cliffs destroyed Cao Cao's dream of a quick unification, but not his hunger for power. After returning north, he did not collapse. Instead, he accelerated his political stand. Between 213 and 216, Cao Cao was successively granted the title of Duke and later King of Wei. Now, a quick reminder. Unlike in Europe, after Qin Shi Huang unified China, the title of king were rarely granted within a unified dynasty. In most cases, there was only one legitimate ruler, the emperor. By the way, if you are interested in how empires, dynasties, and kingdoms function differently in Chinese and European history, let me know. Alright, back to our story. For Cao Cao, holding this title meant something very clear. He had already decided to cross the Rubicon. After that, the Han Emperor was little more than a symbol. Cao Cao now stood just one step away from becoming emperor. Many urged him to take the throne. He only smiled and replied, "If the mandate of heaven truly belongs to me, then I shall be like King Wen of Zhou." King Wen lived in the 11th century BC. He never crowned himself emperor. Instead, he laid the foundation, allowing his son to overthrow the Shang dynasty. What Cao Cao did for his son was in many ways similar to what Pepin the Short did for Charlemagne. But there was one key difference. Unlike Pepin, Cao Cao never claimed the imperial title during his lifetime. However, some argue that the real reason for his hesitation was something else. Maybe a sorrowful gaze he could never forget. The gaze of Xun Yu. Most of Cao Cao's civil officials came from Yingchuan Commandery, a region famous for scholars and strategists. Xun Yu, Guo Jia, Chen Qun, Zhong Yao. At the center of it all stood Xun Yu. When armies marched and battles were fought, Xun Yu remained behind the lines, coordinating logistics, securing grain supplies. He built the system that allowed Cao Cao's power to function. Without him, the machine would not have run. Some even called Xun Yu the kingmaker. But for Xun Yu personally, loyalty had a clear boundary. He followed Cao Cao not to overthrow the Han dynasty, but to restore it. The fragile balance collapsed when Cao Cao accepted the duke title. To Xun Yu, this was no longer reform, it was a beginning of usurpation. Filled with grief and fury, Xun Yu chose death over compromise. He drank poison and ended his life. For Cao Cao, this loss cut deeper than any battlefield defeat. The military, on the other hand, was firmly controlled by Cao Cao's own clan. The Xiahou and Cao families formed the backbone of his generals. Xiahou Dun, Xiahou Yuan, Cao Ren, Cao Hong. Xiahou Dun, a man remembered for his unbreakable will. During a battle, an arrow struck his left eye. The arrowhead lodged deep, blinding him instantly. Xiahou Dun did not retreat. He pulled out the arrow and with his damaged eye. According to the historical accounts, he then swallowed it and declared, "My essence comes from my parents. How could I abandon it?" He returned to the fight immediately. Cao Cao judged people by talent, not background. After Cao Cao defeated Yuan Shao, he discovered so many letters from his own subordinates in Yuan's camp. He claimed never opened a single letter, and burned them all at once. This act bears a striking similarity to Augustus' destruction of the proscription lists. Augustus burned those lists to pull Rome out of chaos, while Cao Cao burned the letters in the hope of ending civil wars. Yet Cao Cao was also deeply suspicious. He once killed his own guardian in his sleep. And once he said, "I would rather betray the world than let the world betray me." All of these earned him the label that would follow him forever. As we discussed before, a cunning hero. In the year 220, at the age of 66, Cao Cao reached the end of his life. On his deathbed, he did not discuss state affairs. Instead, he quietly told his family, "My concubines and performers have worked hard. Let them live at the Bronze Bird Terrace and be cared for." The remaining sense divided it among the ladies. Don't waste it. The man who spent his life in bloodshed died with words full of ordinary warmth. He was no god, just an old man reluctant to leave the human world. After Cao Cao's death, events moved quickly. His son Cao Pi wasted no time. In the same year, he forced Emperor Shen to abdicate the throne. The Han dynasty, already hollow in power, officially came to an end. Cao Pi founded the Wei kingdoms, and in fact, he proclaimed it as the Wei dynasty. Of course, later historians rarely recognized it as a dynasty, simply because it never succeeded in unifying all of China. Cao Pi honored his father as Emperor Wu, which means military achievements. Cao Cao, who had never claimed the throne in life, became emperor only after death. In world history, Cao Cao's path resembles many powerful figures. He was a bit like Napoleon, brilliant, unstoppable, yet defeated at his peak. He was a bit like Julius Caesar, ending an olden order, opening a new age, forever debated. But maybe the one most like him is older Nobunaga of Japan. Sorry, I'm not sure about the pronunciation. Okay. Both did things their own way. Both shattered old systems with iron will, and both came with a step of total unification. And in both cases, it was a formal subordinate who endured, waited, and ultimately won. One was called Sima Yi, the other was called Tokugawa Ieyasu. 1,000 years later, we no longer know, was he loyal or treacherous? Was he hero or villain? Perhaps the uncertainty is the truth. All heroes are not saints. They are flawed, driven, brilliant, and human. And finally, let us listen to the word "sun" in the opening theme of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. The mighty Yanzhou flows eastward, its wave washing away all heroes. Right and wrong, victory and defeat, turn to emptiness in the blink of an eye. Only the green mountains remain, watching sunset after sunset, again and again. Okay, that's everything for our story of Cao Cao. If you enjoyed these stories, and if you like comparison between Eastern and Western history, let me know in the comments. And finally, don't forget to like and subscribe. Okay, see you later.